Hello there, people of the internet. I get a lot of people tell me that guns haven't changed since the French made smokeless powder back in 1886. Technically speaking, the French didn't make smokeless powder. They were just the ones who really were able to utilize it on a large scale. It was actually the Austrians who made smokeless powder first. Look up gun cotton if you haven't learned that little tidbit yet, because that stuff is pretty cool. But the concept behind firearms technology not really fundamentally changing all that much, just because, well, with the French moving on from black powder to smokeless powder, guns really haven't changed all that much, and I'm going to go ahead and say that's simply not true. There are some people who have the belief that because we are firing a projectile that is propelled with smokeless powder, the same way that those projectiles were fired from the 1886 Lebel rifle. As a matter of fact, I've got mine right here. I was just pointing at it, but versus pointing at it, I'll go ahead and just grab it. This one has seen better days, but it is an 1886 Lebel rifle. But this right here, it is the first military adopted en masse bolt action rifle that used smokeless powder, and it got away from the black powder era. And ever since this rifle became what it is, people say that firearms technology hasn't changed because we're still using smokeless powder to launch projectiles, and that is just not true. And if you think that's true, then let's go ahead and run an 1886 Lebel right next to a modern day AR, and we'll see which does better. If you have a problem with 5.56, then I'll grab an AR-10 with the same modern setup and run them side by side like that in like 308 or something. But the bottom line is, even though this right here still runs off of smokeless powder, and it uses that smokeless powder to launch a projectile, there's still significantly more that goes into the development of a firearm than just that. That's like saying cars haven't changed because a Model T ran off of gasoline and modern cars still run off of gasoline. They still are piston-driven engines for the most part. Not unless we're talking about like a rotary engine or something like that. But there's still a piston-driven engine that runs off of gasoline, and so as a result, cars have not changed. But we know that's simply not the case. Cars have developed all sorts of sensors and fuel ejection systems and safety mechanisms, and there's different gear ratios that allow you to get some insane speeds and different ways to increase your horsepower and whatnot, and bottom line, this isn't a difference in the Model T versus modern car video, but the bottom line is things have changed fundamentally with vehicles, and this right here is the same concept. Even though this right here uses smokeless powder to launch a projectile, the differences have changed fundamentally. An AR is not an 1886 Lebel. Minor interruption from a phone call. I can't remember where I was, but I think I was talking about somewhere along the lines of how the AR is not an 1886 Lebel. Just the existence of rail systems on this, allowing the customization of these firearms, it immediately puts it into a different category than the 1886 Lebel. The fact that I can mount a flashlight to this and a red dot and a magnifier for that red dot, along with backup iron sights. This right here is a technology that during the time period where the Lebel was made, it just wasn't around. The Lebel had iron sights and that was it. And this right here, being a very simple self-loading rifle, is also something that didn't exist during that particular time period. There were self-loading guns, but they were stupidly complicated versus this right here, where even a Neanderthal can understand how an AR works. They're very, very, very simple concepts. Not only that, but the technology from the round itself is significantly different than what the 1886 Lebel had to offer. This right here is a very small, lightweight bullet that is effective at the ranges that most conflicts would take place at, even to this day. But that little tiny bullet is moving super, super fast, and so as a result, that is how it gets its energy to put onto its target, just from velocity. And that concept alone, the development of the intermediate cartridge, immediately throws it into another bracket that is beyond what the 1886 Lebel had to offer. Even if we go back a bunch of years, look at the .30-06 M1 Garand, or Garand, however it is you want to pronounce this, adopted by the U.S. military in the mid-1930s. This self-loading rifle was night and day above what the Lebel had to offer. Just the fundamental ideas of the firearms design of something that goes into the simplicity of this, especially with like the simplicity of the feeding mechanism with the little in-block clip, in comparison to the Lebel's tube-fed magazine. I would call that some pretty significant advancements in technology. Granted, the Mannlicher system has been around and was around whenever the Lebel was made. However, that being said, even though there are guns from that time period, like, say, the Commission 88 rifle, I've actually got one of those right here. This right here was made about the same time period as the 1886 Lebel, and immediately we're seeing improvements in technology because this right here has an actual in-block clip that you can load into your rifle versus the single round-fed, tube-fed magazine of the Lebel system. That right there was definitely an antiquated technology. That's something that, like, say, the Mauser 7184, like what I have right here, would run. Just an old-school tube-style fed magazine. And that right there was definitely older technology for that, for that purpose. And we also had firearms that played different roles versus just one universal do-everything rifle, like what the French were pretty much doing with their rifles. They had their Lebel rifles, and then they had their like long rifles, and then short rifles for cavalry and whatnot. But essentially, they were all the same gun that they were trying to force into everybody's hands. Versus later on, like this right here is the M1 carbine or carbine. The United States saw a definite need to have a lighter weight, handy rifle. This right here is more like a PCC by today's standards. But they wanted something that would be effective out to the distances that combat was taking place at, like within 300 yards. And they wanted it to be more effective than, say, a 1911, which can be quite difficult to shoot, especially for people who do not know how to shoot guns, which most of your conscripts had very, very little training in terms of the using of their firearms. But they recognized that having some sort of personal defense weapon like the M1 carbine would be a good idea, and that is just not a concept that, say, the 1886 Lebel ever had, or even several decades after that. There were countries still using that old school way of thinking. Like this right here is an M44 Mosin-Nagant rifle, and it is a shortened version of the Mosin-Nagant, but it still uses that full power 7.62x54R cartridge. So even though it's a shorter, lighter, handier rifle, by God, the concussive blast that comes out of that thing is awful. It's just not that great, not that great of a setup, especially if you don't have hearing protection, and if you're among ranks of people who have those things, or if you're doing CQB fighting with it. It's just not really all that great of an option. Definitely not like what we have modern day. So yeah, firearms have definitely significantly changed and improved since the 1886 Lebel. Just because it's a smokeless powder firing a projectile doesn't mean that it is the same. As a matter of fact, just the improvements on smokeless powder in general as a whole over the past, just the past couple of decades, let's say from the 60s, the improvement of smokeless powder from the 60s alone has significantly improved not only the reliability of firearms and the fundamental way that we can have mechanical systems operate basically indefinitely, but we also are able to get better pressure curves, more consistent pressure curves to increase reliability and increase the amount of velocity that we get with our projectiles, and thus increase the effectiveness of our ammunition. So we have come a long way. Firearms technology has changed several times over since the invention of smokeless powder and the use of the 1886 Lebel. Even the French, whenever they moved on to their Berthier rifles, were able to make significant advances and significant strides away from that Lebel rifle. There is a lot that has improved with firearms technology. Now, if we want to start talking about the Commission 88 rifle, that right there was a rifle that was way, way ahead of its time. Where did I put it? Is that you? Yeah, this is it. This was a rifle that was way ahead of its time. Rimless cartridge, full power rifle. It took a 318 diameter bullet. It fired a 150 grain bullet at approximately 3,000 feet per second. Probably a little bit slower at this particular time period, but it would have been around that mark. I'm willing to bet it would probably have the same ballistic equivalence of that of 308, but the cartridge is far longer. We're looking at a 57 millimeter cartridge versus a 51 millimeter cartridge. We can do a lot with a 308. We can even have it be significantly more efficient than something like that. But that's probably a video for another time. So there we go. There's my response to guns haven't changed in the past 150 years. Because I'm going to go ahead and say, yes, they have. They absolutely have. Heck, this right here, this is a Hakim. And if you look on the front of this Hakim, you'll see that it has a pretty good muzzle brake on it. And this muzzle brake is actually really, really effective at reducing not only recoil, but muzzle climb as well. This right here is a game changer since we're firing full power 8mm Mauser rifle ammunition. That right there helps a lot, like a lot in terms of making the rifle not only easier to shoot, but easier to keep on your target. That alone is a significant improvement. And we don't see that on military guns for a very, very long time. As a matter of fact, even the M1 Grand, it doesn't have one. Or the Mauser rifles by a pretty huge margin, they don't have one. Or the Mosins by a pretty huge margin, they don't have one. I wonder why that wasn't more standard. Realistically, I don't think it was until the adoption of the M14 in U.S. service where we saw a regular muzzle brake. And then the M16 with its muzzle brake as well, Burge Cage, flash hider, and that's probably going beyond the scopes of this video. So thanks for watching, folks. I appreciate your time. Like, subscribe, share. Description below is a link to all sorts of stuff. Go check it out. You guys go off. Have yourself a fantastic day. I'll see you in the next episode. Been a little while since I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. Poor man's Gary. It's a shame that bolt-action shotguns aren't more mainstream.